Good morning, grace and peace to you. It is a joy to be among you and to just enjoy God's presence as it moves in our midst here. I want to talk with you this morning a little bit about life building in Jesus' way. And if I may, I'll say a little bit about my overall approach to Jesus and the Gospels. The first way in which I approach this is just to think of Jesus. When I read his teaching, let me encourage you to think of him as the smartest person who's walked on this planet, who's illuminating for us some of the most basic issues in human life. Okay? The things that are really foundational that we need in order to live well. And I've found him. I grew up in church, and I strayed for a while. But as Steve has told you, God got my attention and brought me back. But I had a lot of curiosities, and I needed to make sense of this way in relation to other things. And so I've spent a lot of time looking at kind of the history of human thought and a number of the great thinkers throughout the ages. And I'll just say that I've found Jesus to be the most insightful and the most thorough in the way in which he guides us into the truly foundational elements of human life. He teaches us how to deal with things that we all have to face. And the passage that we're going to look at this morning at the very end of Matthew chapter 7, this 3 chapters often referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. It's the kind of the longest extended section of teaching that we have from Jesus. And if you look at what he deals with, he deals with things that we all have to face in life. Things like anger and contempt, and what that does, how that leads to violence and destruction in human life if we let it go, and how to step out of that. He deals with things like finding ourselves kind of caught up in desires that go in the wrong direction. Right? And he talks about things like, how to deal with a spouse that one's unsatisfied with or is in turmoil with. These are all things that I don't know about any of you, but I mean, so far I haven't hit anything that I haven't had a moment or two where I've had to deal with in life, right? Jesus, he talks about the things that we all face, but he kind of cuts through and he shows us how to live well. And so I want to just kind of listen to him in the wisdom that he brings for everyday life, and encourage you to do the same. Now, that's not really a new thing, though it maybe isn't the typical way of reading Jesus nowadays. If you go back to the ancient world, over the course of the first 3-4 centuries, you have this mass conversion of the intelligentsia that turned to Jesus and his way. And they say very clearly that the reason they're turning is two big reasons. One, Jesus is answering the questions that the philosophers have been struggling with and never managing to get to for, at that point, about 600 years. But that's proven by the fact that he alone has actually brought substantial numbers of people to a really transformed life. Okay? Ordinary people have learned to live without anger and contempt, have learned how to love their neighbors as themselves, have learned how to overwhelm hostility and evil with goodness and with forgiveness and care, and have been able to do that even up to in the face of death, right? And so it became kind of apparent in the ancient world that he had the only viable way to live well. And so there was this mass conversion. It was the intelligentsia that converted. So Jesus, he's the smartest person who ever lived. giving us insights into the most basic elements of human life and how to live well. And he does that with a great realism, and with a thoroughness. The second thing that I want to ask you to think of when you read this is just that Jesus is still taking students. Okay? And that's not just a metaphor. It's not just a metaphor. I know that, disciple or it's become the name of a denomination and all of that, but it's actually just a very straightforward invitation that Jesus makes. And he's still alive, very well, thank you. And he is interactive. He responds when you cry out to him. And he's very capable of guiding us into this life still today. And so, as you read through, part of what you see is that Jesus, he prepared a community that was capable of continuing to learn from him and hear from him before he ascends. And so he made it possible for ordinary people from all walks of life to learn his wisdom, and that has continued throughout the centuries. Okay, and it continues today. It's an invitation that is available for you and me. We can become his students, and as Luke said, today is always the day to do that. Okay, today is always the day. So, with that as a little preamble, let's take a look here at Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. And what Jesus does here at the end of this large teaching block is he provides a kind of frame, four truths to frame a life lived in Jesus' way. And so let's, if you will, read it again, and then we'll look at these truths one at a time. Everyone, therefore, who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice may be compared to a man of practical wisdom, a practically wise man, who builds his house upon the rock, founds his house upon the rock. And the rains came down, and the rivers rose, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and it didn't fall because it had been founded upon the stone, upon the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not practice them may be compared to a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rains came down, and the rivers came, and the winds burst against that house and hit it, and it fell, and great was its fall. Okay. So the first kind of thing that Jesus encourages us to do here is to approach life with the most basic categories in mind when we make our decisions. And the most basic category, the one that kind of applies to the most circumstances that we face, is that between wisdom and foolishness, between kind of a discernment of what makes sense and makes for a good life versus what would lead to collapse. And that's really important to keep in mind because these evaluative categories of foolishness versus practical wisdom, it makes all the difference in life over a long period of time. And he's encouraging us to take a long view to things, not just, what do I need to make it through the next hour or the next day or week, but what builds a life? What builds a life? And so Jesus, he's offering us wisdom. And it's important to think in those terms instead of others that sometimes we default to. You see, there's a problem that is fairly common, I think, among religious people, and that is that we have a tendency to use really extreme, hyperbolic ways of evaluating the good and bad in the world and in other people. And so we default very quickly to righteousness versus wickedness, right? It's good and it's evil. And those things are real, but they're a bit more like destinations than like the little forks in the road that get you to that destination, right? The truth is that the vast majority of the decisions that we make day in and day out in our everyday life are neither wicked nor particularly righteous, right? Kind of the Hitler and the Mother Teresa sort of things. Those don't happen every day in our life. We're frankly not consistent enough to be that good or that bad very often. Instead, you could think of those as what life leads to, right? But it leads there through a myriad of little forks in the road of micro decisions day in, day out. And those little micro decisions that we face every day, those are matters of wisdom or foolishness, right? Of making a choice that moves in the right direction or something that kind of detracts. And so Jesus encourages us to approach this life first, not forgetting about, good and evil and righteousness and wickedness, but realizing that we first need to go through kind of this process of discerning how to do what is wise, what has practical wisdom versus what is foolish. Now, that's important because the truth of the matter is that I don't have to be wicked or evil to ruin my life. Foolishness will do the trick. Foolishness will do the trick. All I need to do is just kind of stumble along, be thoughtless, act on whatever impulse is there, and cumulatively over time, that will bring about destruction. And you see what actually happens often with those moments where we see, wow, that was really, really wicked in a person's actions. Often what's behind that is just a person who's been foolish for a long time, who's not prepared, whose insides have not been shaped well, who finds him or herself in a really pressurized situation, and then bad things come out, And so if we want to not become wicked and we do want to eventually live as a thoroughly good, transformed person, what we need to aim at are those micro decisions of wisdom day by day, and that's what Jesus offers. So that's the first frame within this life is lived out. Second frame, you see in here what I like to call a law of progression. Mentioned it earlier in our seminar, but it simply is this. Notice in this that we're always building. It's not that the wise man builds and the foolish man doesn't or something like that. No matter whether we're pursuing wisdom or we're living in a foolish way, we're always building. There's no option outside of that. And I think what this is referring to is this, the fact that we're always adapting and becoming more ready to do kind of what we've done before. Right? Anything that I repeat becomes easier for me to do. And so there's this law of progression in human life. There's a kind of momentum that takes us in one direction or another. And that's why it's important that we think in terms of wisdom and have the momentum going in that way. So whatever we repeat becomes easier to do, and that's true, whether that is, praying for those who irritate us and responding with grace and patience and love to those who yell at us. On the one hand, if we do that, that becomes easier and easier to do over time. Or if we kind of lay around and go on YouTube spirals and pound potato chips and, Dr. Pepper, sitting on the couch, that also becomes easier and easier to do over time, right? So there's this law of progression in human life. And it's important to be aware of this because whatever acts we repeat tend to become habits, and our habits tend to settle into our character. And character, then, over time, really is much of what sets the direction and the outcome of our life, right? And so this law of progression is the second corner frame. I know sermons are supposed to have 3. I usually can only come up with 2 points, but I'm making up for it by giving you 4 this morning. So there's 4 corners. The third one here is just to realize that foundations are not optional. Okay? Foundations are not optional. Human life, it's just the nature of human life that we have to found it on something deeper and older than we are. Okay? Life in this world is just too complex for us to figure it all out ourselves. So no individual can figure it all out, and no generation or society can figure it all out in one pass. And so we have to build upon others' work, other things. Foundations just are not optional. We have to build on things received. But what we do have an option about is what foundation we're going to build on. Okay? We can choose who we listen to. We can evaluate and compare, and then we can kind of set about living a life based on one way or another. Right? So we don't have the option of going without foundations. I know that that's kind of a typical ambition today, right? It's like, oh, just you do you, be yourself, right? Make your own way. The truth is, life's too complex. We have to build our life on something bigger and deeper. And so there's going to be foundations. The question is, what foundation? And so here's what you need to know about foundations. A foundation only needs to be as deep as you want to build high. Right? You only need to dig down enough to give the stability for the heights you want that structure to go to. And you only need the materials of the foundation to be solid enough, strong enough to last as long as you want that structure to last, right? So it can be a completely wise thing to pitch a tent on sand, right? You're picking it up the next day. What does it matter, right? But if what you want is to, be guided into the heights of Christ-like character, you're going to want to dig deep, right? And since you're going to live forever, okay, since death is not the end and you're going to exist forever, you're going to want that to be founded upon the rock, which is Christ. Okay? You want to make sure that it's rooted in something that won't shift. And the reason for this is that sooner or later, we all have to kind of deal with the reality check, right? And this is kind of the fourth corner, is the reality check, the fact that there's a storm coming, okay? The reality is that things will always kind of, they'll react in keeping with what they are, with their nature. That's true of sand, it's true of stone. Things are able, things respond under given conditions in keeping with what they are, with their nature. And the fact is that sooner or later we come into those difficulties in life and we bump into reality, right? We can kind of get by for a while imagining that things are different, that we can kind of make our own way without having to, worry about constraints in life. But there's those moments where we realize that that's not working anymore. Now, persons have natures too. Okay? And it's possible for us to change, not our nature, but to change our character. But we can do that only at a certain rate, right? We have to go through that process in a way that respects kind of the way we're put together. And if we change too rapidly, in some ways, we just become disoriented. And so people are only able to change at a certain pace. And so what Jesus has done here prior to this, earlier, is he's talked about how the insides of a person kind of come out. If the tree on the inside is bad fruit comes out. If the tree on the inside is good fruit comes out, and then you can know what a person is by the things coming out of them. You can see how that plays out. And so what he's doing here is he's encouraging us to go through a process where our insides change, which takes some time, but where that then inevitably comes out into the world around us. And so we do that. We enter into this process because we know that there's kind of the reality test coming. And so this fourth corner of the frame is just to realize that the storm's coming. Okay? As we go about building our lives, as we engage in Jesus' way, as we pay attention to doing what he says, which is how that foundation's built. I'm sorry, I just realized I missed something very important, so I'm going to just back up and repeat this, okay? In this foundation, I said we don't have a choice. The way we're building our foundation, the choice that we're making is we're either doing or not doing the things that we hear from Jesus. If we hear him and don't put it into practice, that's a kind of progress. That becomes easier and easier to do, to just ignore him. But when we do what we hear, that is then founding this life. It's digging deep so that character can build high. It's putting our life on the rock. So doing what he says, that's the process of building the foundation well. Now the reason we need to do that, or one of the reasons, is that the storm is always coming. The storm's always coming. And again, the rain, the floods, the harsh winds, the pounding waves, this is not unique to one life or another. Right? It's not that if you don't follow Jesus' way, you're going to get pounded, and you follow Jesus' way and you just kind of sail and, it's smooth seas and clear skies. That's not it. Nobody makes it through this life without incredible difficulties. That's just the world we are living in. And Jesus, he's very upfront about that. He doesn't pretend it's any different. And so every one of us are going to deal with relational difficulties. There'll be friends that are lost. We're going to have loved ones that die, sometimes tragically and suddenly. We're gonna face difficulties in kind of making our way with career, with all sorts of things. There's going to be health difficulties. Nobody makes it through this life without just awful things happening. That's coming. The storm, it's always coming, right? And so we need to remember that because if we live wisely or if we live foolishly, it makes all the difference in terms of how we're going to deal with those difficulties as they come. And so Jesus teaches us. He teaches us to pray. Right? To pray, Father, keep bad things from happening to me. Don't lead me into testing, but deliver me from evil. Right? Don't see where I'll break, but keep bad things from happening. That's a prayer of wisdom. It's a prayer of wisdom. And he teaches us to pray that, and God does answer. Okay. He also teaches us how to prepare through taking on disciplines. Right. He teaches us how to engage in, giving to others and prayer in secret. And this has a way of solidifying and strengthening a character and making it capable of standing up against things. And the thing is that much like, foundations are invisible if everything's going well, right? You don't see the foundation of this building that's holding it up. Well, the prayer and the discipline and the life before the Father alone, all of those are invisible. You don't see that on the outside looking in on another person. But they're what hold a life up when the difficulties come. And so Jesus teaches us that because the truth of the matter is that there's always a storm coming. But that's not the end of the truth. The deepest truth is this: the storm's always coming, but if you've been living in Jesus' way, when the storm comes, it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. He is more than capable of seeing you through this. The waves will hit, right? You can expect to have to face harsh resistance, but there is strength available when that does come, and Jesus will see you through to the other side. So I pass on these 4 truths that Jesus kind of hands over at the end of this greatest section of teaching. The first is just to remember, approach life in terms of wisdom. Okay, that applies to every decision in life. You can aim for wisdom that Jesus supplies. Second, remember that whatever we do, it becomes easier to do. And so make sure that you enact what you hear from Jesus. That's what you want to progress in, okay? The law of progression. And third, remember that foundations aren't optional, but you can choose which ones you're going to build your life on. So dig deep and found yourself on Jesus and His way. It'll see you through. And then finally, the storm's always coming, but the storm's no match for Jesus if you've founded your life on Him. Now, I want to just invite you as we stand and sing. If there's anybody who would like to pray, anybody who would like to rededicate their life to walk in Jesus' way, I'll be here. I'm going to just walk to the back, and before I come back to my seat, if anybody wants to pray, I'd be happy to pray with you. But let's stand and sing.